Ladies, and especially my gentlemen watching today, have you ever had that gut feeling that something's off? She's sweet, she's charming, and then she drops three innocent-sounding words that feel just a little too familiar. You ignore the red flags, and before you know it, you're giving everything while getting almost nothing. Today, I'm revealing the three words she says when she's about to use you. And more importantly, how to flip the script on her. Stay with me, because if you miss this, you'll keep falling for the same trap again and again. There's a rhythm to how manipulation enters your life, and it almost never starts with obvious red flags. In fact, it often begins with warmth, a compliment, a laugh, a long late-night conversation that feels different, maybe even intimate. That's the part no one tells you. Manipulation doesn't barge in wearing a red warning sign. It shows up gently, like comfort. It mirrors your dreams, matches your energy, and makes you feel seen. And that's exactly why it's so effective. When someone is about to use you, especially in a romantic context, they don't lead with demands. They lead with curiosity, admiration, and sometimes even flattery. They build emotional equity in you that they have no intention of reciprocating. That's the pattern. And recognizing the beginning of it is where your power lies. Let's say you meet a woman who instantly locks into your frequency. She asks about your goals, listens attentively, and even mirrors your values. You feel good around her. Maybe you even feel chosen. Then the subtle shift begins. She starts planting seeds, stories about how she's been let down by others, how she's had to do everything on her own, how hard life has been lately. It's never framed as a complaint, just a fact. And in that moment, your instinct to protect, to provide, to show her you're different, it kicks in. She doesn't have to ask for anything outright. You offer. And just like that, the dynamic has started to tilt. The key here is subtlety. The manipulation isn't in the story she tells. It's in the way she positions herself within it. She's not just a woman who's had a hard time. She's now become someone who needs you to help her feel better, do better, live better. But she doesn't say that. She lets you feel it, infer it, act on it. And the moment you do, the pattern locks in. She presents a minor crisis, you fix it. She says she's overwhelmed, you step in. She hints at needing help, and you provide. Over time, that pattern becomes your new normal. You're no longer acting from mutual emotional exchange. You're acting from obligation, from habit, from the silent promise that you'll always be the one who shows up when she needs something. Let's take a specific example. Imagine she's talking to you about how her rent is coming up, and things are a bit tight. She doesn't ask you to pay it. She's not that bold. But she does tell you how exhausted she is from working 2 jobs, how she's skipped meals to save money, how she's considering asking her parents but hates to burden them again. She lets the weight of her story sit in the space between you. Not because she wants comfort, but because she's planting an emotional trigger. And if you care about her, it works. You offer to help. Maybe it's a one-time thing, just this once, just until she gets back on her feet. She thanks you, sweetly, sincerely even. But 2 weeks later, there's another story, another pressure, another soft nudge. You begin to realize that most of your conversations are now about her needs, her deadlines, her stress, and you? You don't remember the last time she asked how you were doing without turning the conversation back to herself. But by then, you're already in deep. You've given too much, said too much, cared too much, and now you're afraid that pulling away would make you seem cold, selfish, unloving. That fear? It's part of the manipulation, too. It keeps you compliant. You begin to measure your worth by how helpful you can be. You tell yourself that being needed is a sign of intimacy, but in truth, it's become a form of quiet control. What makes this pattern so dangerous is that it doesn't always come from malice. Some people manipulate as a form of survival. It's how they've learned to navigate relationships. But intent doesn't erase impact. If you're constantly the giver, the fixer, the one bending to accommodate someone else's emotional or material needs, while yours go unnoticed or unmet, you are being used, whether the other person realizes it or not. Emotional manipulation thrives in imbalance. It conditions you to believe that your role is to solve rather than to be seen. And slowly, without realizing it, you start losing your own voice in the relationship. You become supportive to the point of invisibility. And that's when you know the pattern has taken root. It doesn't have to be financial either. Sometimes it's your time, your emotional labor, your energy. Maybe she only calls when she's bored, when she needs a pep talk, when her plans fall through. You start noticing that she rarely initiates unless there's something in it for her. The conversations are rarely mutual. They're strategic. She'll give you just enough validation to keep you close, just enough affection to keep you hopeful, but not enough investment to build anything real. And by the time you notice the pattern, you've already trained yourself to be okay with crumbs. At first glance, can you just... sounds like the most harmless, even innocent phrase in the world. It doesn't scream manipulation. It doesn't sound like a demand. In fact, it often feels like a polite request. Something small, something doable, something you can handle. But that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because these three words are rarely about the actual favor. They are about setting a tone. They are a test, a subtle probe into your boundaries, your generosity, and most importantly, your willingness to put someone else's needs before your own, even when that person hasn't truly earned that space in your life yet. Can you just... is often the first step in a pattern where your time, your energy, and sometimes even your finances begin to shift slowly in one direction, away from you and toward her. The real issue isn't the words themselves. It's how and when they show up. Can you just pick me up really quick? Can you just cover this one thing for me? Can you just lend me a little for now? These phrases don't hit you like red flags at first, but pay attention to when they're used. You'll notice they tend to come after a stretch of closeness or emotional bonding. Maybe she's been sweet, flirty, even vulnerable. You've been talking for days or weeks, and the chemistry feels solid. She makes you feel special. Then, out of nowhere, she needs a small favor. And that's where the script begins to flip. Because while you're thinking of it as a kind gesture, she may be watching your response to decide just how much she can get from you. Let's take a scenario. You've been texting for a few weeks. The conversations are playful, deep, even emotional. She tells you things she claims she's never told anyone. She laughs at your jokes. She talks about how different you are. You're beginning to feel like this might be going somewhere meaningful. Then, one evening, she casually says, "Can you just help me order something? My card's acting up, and it's kind of urgent." She throws it in lightly, like it's not a big deal. You pause, but you say yes, because you want to show her you're reliable. She thanks you with a heart emoji, maybe even a sweet voice note. You feel good about helping her. But notice what happens next. A few days pass, and the pattern repeats. "Can you just send a little something for transport? Can you just handle this one thing for me? I'll sort you out later." And here's the key detail. The reciprocity never comes. The "I'll pay you back" never materializes. The emotional connection slowly fades or becomes something she only pulls back up when she wants something again. Suddenly, her sweetness is conditional. Her attention shows up only when she needs help. And you begin to realize that these small asks have accumulated. They've become the basis of your dynamic, a dynamic where you're always giving and she's always receiving. But because it all started with just a few words, you didn't see it coming. You told yourself you were being kind, that you were being a good man, that helping someone you care about is what love should look like. And here's the truth. Love does include sacrifice, But manipulation hides behind that truth to extract more from you than what is fair, healthy, or mutual. When a woman keeps asking for just one more thing, she's not always measuring the cost in money or time. She's measuring your threshold. She's gauging how far she can stretch your boundaries without you pushing back. That's why those 3 words matter, not for what they ask, but for what they reveal. They expose whether you have a clear sense of self-respect, whether you're someone who gives from overflow or someone who can be guilted into giving, even when your cup is already empty. Another example, maybe she says, "Can you just do me this one favor? I promise it's the last time." That phrase, "the last time," is often the hook. It plays on your desire for closure, for finality, for a version of this story where you help her out one more time and then things finally balance. But if you pay close attention, that last time is rarely the last, because someone who genuinely values you doesn't stack guilt onto kindness. They don't frame requests in a way that forces you to choose between self-respect and emotional approval. But a manipulator does. She'll add urgency. She'll highlight how no one else is there for her. She'll say things like, "I knew I could count on you," or "I wouldn't ask if I had another choice." These aren't just statements, they're subtle pressure points designed to fast-track you into agreement. By the time you realize what's happening, you've likely given more than you're comfortable with, and now you feel stuck. You worry that saying no makes you look cold. You fear that pulling back will ruin the connection you've built. But here's what's often true. That connection was never about you. It was about your usefulness. And those 3 words, "Can you just," were the opening notes of a song that plays on your empathy while quietly draining your value. Understanding the psychology behind why some women use others isn't about placing blame. It's about awareness, emotional intelligence, and recognizing patterns before they cost you your self-worth. Because when a woman starts to use a man, it's rarely as deliberate or evil as people imagine. It's more often the result of learned behavior, deep emotional conditioning, and a survivalist mindset that was formed long before she ever met you. It might look like selfishness on the surface, but beneath that, it's often a strategy rooted in self-protection, insecurity, or transactional thinking. Some women have simply been taught by their environment, past relationships, or even cultural messaging that a man's value lies in what he can do for her, not who he is as a person. And once that becomes the frame through which she views relationships, every interaction becomes a negotiation of resources, attention, and control. What drives this kind of behavior is often linked to power and validation. In certain cases, using a man becomes a way to feel in control when she feels powerless in other areas of her life. Maybe she's had partners who neglected her, or family dynamics where she always had to fend for herself. So when she finds someone willing to show up, willing to listen, spend, support, the instinct isn't always to nurture that connection, but to leverage it. She might not even be aware she's doing it, but deep down, she's using your effort to regulate her own self-worth. When you say yes to her needs, it reinforces her sense of importance. It validates that she's wanted, that she has influence, that she matters. And if she's never learned to build that validation internally through real emotional intimacy, then external control, especially over giving men, becomes the shortcut she leans on again and again. Let's say she grew up around women who constantly told her, "Don't ever struggle when a man is around." Or maybe she watched her mother survive by relying on men without ever forming deep emotional bonds. Those lessons don't disappear in adulthood. They shape her perception of love. So when she meets you and senses your kindness, your willingness to give, your desire to be her provider or protector, she doesn't necessarily interpret that as love. She interprets it as an opportunity, a chance to feel safe or powerful, even if it comes at your emotional or financial expense. She may even convince herself that she deserves it because she's been through enough, or because she gives in her own way. But if what she gives is always emotional and what she receives is always material, that's not love. That's emotional economics. And the imbalance is psychological, not accidental. Another layer to this is the subtle use of guilt and obligation. When a woman uses soft manipulation, she doesn't control through anger or aggression. She controls through emotion. She'll make you feel like saying no would be a betrayal of the connection you've built. She'll position herself as the helpless one, the overwhelmed one, the misunderstood one, because she knows that if you're empathetic, you'll feel responsible for her comfort. That psychological hook, making you feel needed, is what keeps you attached, even when you feel drained. And over time, your role shifts from partner to provider, from lover to lifeline. You're not being loved for who you are, but for what you're willing to give. And if you don't give, the emotional temperature in the relationship drops, the affection fades, the attention disappears. That's the transactional trap she's created, whether consciously or not. A real-world example. Imagine you're seeing someone who constantly vents about her life struggles. Every conversation circles back to her stress, her job, her friends, her family. You empathize, you offer advice, but slowly your emotional support becomes a given. Then she starts asking for little things, help with errands, small loans, favors. At first it feels natural. You care about her, after all. But then you realize that when you're going through something, she's unavailable, distant, disinterested. You notice she only leans in when she's benefiting, and when you try to talk about the imbalance, she flips it, says you're being dramatic, that you don't understand her struggles, that you're making her feel guilty. Suddenly, you become the one apologizing. That right there, that subtle emotional reversal, is one of the most powerful psychological tactics in manipulation. It creates confusion, guilt, and a sense that standing up for yourself might cost you the relationship. What's even more complex is that some women genuinely believe they are showing love, even while they're using you. Because in their mind, being emotionally available or sexually attentive is enough to justify what they're taking. They believe their presence is a gift, and your contributions, time, money, attention, are just the price of being close to them. That belief is rooted in a distorted sense of entitlement, often propped up by social validation and past experiences where men did reward them for the bare minimum. So when you start to ask for balance, they don't see it as a reasonable request. They see it as a threat to their position, a disruption of the emotional economy they've built their identity around, and that's why these patterns persist. Not because she's inherently manipulative, but because the psychology of being validated through control has never been challenged. Your emotional responsibility isn't about guarding yourself to the point of isolation, nor is it about refusing to care for others. It's about taking ownership of your internal world, setting standards around your energy, and recognizing that your feelings, your self-respect, your peace of mind, they are your job, not hers. No matter how deeply you care for someone, no matter how attracted you are or how much potential you see in the relationship, you cannot outsource the duty of emotional safety to another person. Because the moment you begin to hand over your emotional compass, letting someone else dictate how you feel about yourself, how you spend your energy, how you interpret love, you've already started abandoning yourself. And that abandonment is often where manipulation takes root. When you don't take full responsibility for how you move through your relationships, you leave space for others to define it for you, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, but always at a cost. It's so easy to confuse being emotionally available with being emotionally responsible. You think that listening to her problems, being the shoulder she leans on, the guy who always comes through, that makes you a good man. And maybe it does, to an extent. But when you do that at the expense of your own needs, when your own emotions are consistently pushed to the background, when your love becomes about service rather than reciprocity, that's no longer generosity. That's self-erasure. Your emotional responsibility begins with knowing when to step up and when to step back, when to support someone without making their chaos your home, when to say, I care about you, but I can't be your emotional sponge. Because the truth is, not everyone wants healing. Some people want comfort, some people want attention, and if you don't know where your boundaries are, you'll confuse their temporary need for your permanent role and end up emotionally bankrupt because of it. Let's say you're talking to a woman who constantly reaches out when she's overwhelmed. She calls you crying, texts you paragraphs, leans on your strength when hers is running low. You feel honored to be her safe space. But what you don't realize is that over time, her emotional regulation becomes your responsibility. She stops processing anything herself. She simply offloads it onto you. And in the beginning, you accept it. You tell yourself that this is what support looks like. But months go by, and you realize she never really asks how you are. She doesn't hold space when you're tired. When you're down, she goes silent. Suddenly, you're doing the emotional lifting for two, and she's just showing up when it benefits her. You've now absorbed not just her emotions, but the invisible pressure to stay strong, stay patient, stay giving, while quietly neglecting your own need to be held. That's the moment where your emotional responsibility has to kick in. Not in anger, not in blame, but in clarity. You have to pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling myself that makes this imbalance feel acceptable? Maybe you're telling yourself that real love means sacrifice, or that if you don't show up, she'll fall apart. And that makes you feel needed, important, masculine. But here's the truth. Being needed and being valued are not the same thing. If someone only shows up when they need something from you, that's not a relationship. That's a dependency. And the longer you allow it, the more you condition yourself to believe that this is all you're worth, that your role in a woman's life is to constantly fix, rescue, soothe, and save, even when you're running on empty. And sometimes the hardest part about emotional responsibility is unlearning the belief that if you don't give everything, you'll lose the connection. But what you're really losing is yourself in the process of trying to maintain something one-sided. You end up afraid to express your own feelings because you don't want to rock the boat. You hesitate to draw boundaries because you don't want to seem selfish. But holding back your truth, suppressing your exhaustion, pretending everything's fine when it's not, that's not strength, that's fear. And the longer you operate from fear, the more power you give to the other person. You become emotionally submissive, adjusting your behavior based on how they'll respond, rather than what you need in order to feel grounded, seen, and respected. The mistake so many men make is assuming that if they love hard enough, if they give enough, if they show up consistently, the woman will eventually see their worth and reciprocate. But love doesn't work like that. You cannot perform your way into being valued. Your emotional labor cannot be a down payment on someone else's loyalty or care. And if someone needs you to suffer quietly in order to stay close to you, that's not connection. That's control dressed up as intimacy. Emotional responsibility means learning to sit with discomfort. It means being willing to walk away, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. It means reminding yourself that your emotions matter too, that you're not just a provider or protector. You're a human being with needs, boundaries, and a voice that deserves to be heard without fear of punishment or withdrawal. And if someone truly respects you, they won't require your silence to stay close. They'll want your fullness. They'll want your truth. Flipping it on her doesn't mean playing games, becoming cold, or trying to manipulate her back. That's not power. That's emotional immaturity dressed in pride. To flip it on her with class means to shift the energy from a place of imbalance to a place of grounded control. It means no longer dancing to her rhythm when that rhythm is designed to keep you off balance. It means stepping into a version of yourself that no longer needs validation from breadcrumbs, favors masked as affection, or conditional attention. Because once you begin to recognize when she's using you, emotionally, financially, or otherwise, the goal is not revenge. The goal is redirection. You stop feeding into her narrative and begin writing your own. You stop reacting and start responding with clarity, intention, and boundaries, so undeniable they make her either rise to meet you or disappear when she realizes you're no longer easy to manipulate. Let's say she's used the classic line, "Can you just do me one more favor?" And maybe she's asking this after a string of emotional pulls, some flirting, maybe even a few empty promises about what you and her could be. You've been there, believing that the connection is meaningful, investing not just your time and money, but your hope, hoping that with each yes you give, she'll finally see your worth. Now, here comes the shift. Instead of jumping to fix her issue, you calmly say, "I think you've come to expect me to always come through, but I've realized I need to start choosing what gives me peace instead of pressure." That's it. Direct, calm, non-defensive. You're not angry. You're not being petty. You're simply stating your truth, and by doing so, you flip the script, because she's expecting the same dance, guilt, urgency, your quick compliance. But what you've done is disrupt the rhythm, and with that, she's left to face the part of herself that's been relying on your compliance to keep her needs met. Flipping it on her with class also means reintroducing yourself, not with words, but with behavior. Maybe she used to send one-word texts and you'd still reply with paragraphs. Maybe she'd cancel plans and you'd reschedule, just to accommodate her. Maybe she'd ignore your needs and you'd suppress them, thinking it was too early or too risky to speak up. But now, you stop showing up in the same way. You match her energy, not out of pettiness, but as a reflection of clarity. If she takes a day to respond, you take two. If she goes quiet after a favor, you don't follow up. If she reappears with sweetness only when she needs something, you politely decline. You're no longer available in the way she's used to. And here's what happens next. She gets confused. Not because you've hurt her, but because the access she once had is no longer free. You've changed the cost of entry. Your time, your attention, your emotional labor. It's now a premium service, and that's how you regain control without losing your dignity. A classic example. She sends a message saying, "Hey, I'm stuck. Can you just help me out this once?" Instead of ignoring it or lashing out, you respond, "I've helped you out a few times, and I noticed that pattern's starting to make me feel unbalanced. I'm no longer in a space where I say yes to things that don't feel mutual." Now pause. That statement does two things. It reminds her of your previous generosity without shaming her, and it sets a standard moving forward. You didn't insult her. You didn't accuse her. You simply placed the mirror in front of her and walked away with your spine straight. That's grace. That's class. Because now she has to sit with it. She has to either level up and meet you where you are, or walk away, realizing she can't get the same results with the same tactics anymore. You'll also notice something interesting when you start flipping the script this way. She might test your boundaries even harder. She may double down on emotional cues, sending flirty messages, reminding you of good memories, acting extra sweet right when she senses she's losing control. That's the final hook, the last card. But this time, you don't take the bait. Instead of falling for charm wrapped in manipulation, you stay rooted. When she says, "I miss you," you say, "I hope you're well." When she hints at reconnecting, you say, "I'm moving differently now. I only make space for what nourishes me." Every time you respond like that, you reclaim another piece of your self-worth. You're not trying to change her. You're changing you. You're no longer emotionally available for confusion. You've graduated from begging for basic respect to commanding it silently, through your detachment, through your standards, through the way you choose yourself again and again. Because here's what flipping it with class really is. It's showing her that the version of you she was playing didn't even scratch the surface of your value. It's showing her that what she thought was control was actually convenience. And now that you've made yourself less convenient, she'll either face her own limitations or fade away into the silence she used to impose on you. Either way, you win. Because the real flip isn't about proving anything to her. It's about returning to yourself, calm, clear, unbothered, and no longer waiting to be chosen by someone who couldn't even meet your soul halfway. Scarcity is one of the most powerful forces you can embody in a world, and especially in relationships, that constantly rewards over-availability. When you show up too often, respond too quickly, always say yes, and make yourself emotionally, mentally, and physically accessible without discretion, you unconsciously devalue yourself. People don't cherish what they feel entitled to. They don't pause to appreciate what they believe will always be there. And in many cases, especially with certain types of women who have learned to manipulate emotionally generous men, the more you give freely, the more invisible you become. Scarcity isn't about playing games or faking disinterest. It's about realignment, recognizing that your time, your presence, your affection, and your effort are not bottomless resources. They're privileges, and anyone who fails to treat them that way shouldn't be receiving them in the first place. When you begin to shift into a mindset of scarcity, people around you start to feel the contrast, because up until now, you may have been the one who was always available. You replied within seconds. You kept making space even when it was inconvenient. You adjusted your schedule, your standards, even your boundaries just to maintain the connection. And maybe, without realizing it, you started rewarding inconsistent behavior, chasing when she pulled back, giving more when she gave less. But the moment you pull that energy back, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, a subtle power shift happens. She notices the silence. She notices the absence of your effort. She begins to feel what you were always carrying. That's the power of scarcity. It forces people to confront what they took for granted, and it holds up a mirror to their own inconsistencies. Imagine you've been talking to a woman who only engages when she's bored, lonely, or needs something. Attention, money, reassurance. She's warm when she wants something and distant when you do. You've been answering her calls, showing up emotionally, maybe even financially, hoping that consistency will earn you her commitment, but nothing changes. Then one day, you stop. You don't announce it. You don't argue. You just quietly stop responding to low-effort texts. You no longer drop everything to be her emotional cushion. You no longer initiate. You no longer explain yourself. And suddenly, she's texting you more. She's asking if everything's okay. She's posting things she knows will get your attention. What's happening here isn't love. It's her sensing the power of your withdrawal. It's her realizing that she had unlimited access to something rare and never earned it. That quiet shift, the way she begins to notice your absence more than she ever valued your presence, that's scarcity working for you. This isn't about withholding love or affection to punish someone. It's about creating healthy distance so that your presence becomes something that's earned, not assumed. When you move with the energy of someone who values themselves, people either step up or step off. And either way, you win. Because someone who steps up is revealing that they're capable of matching your effort, but they needed a wake-up call. And someone who fades when you stop overextending was never truly invested. They were just consuming your energy without ever intending to reciprocate it. Scarcity is the filter that shows you who's real and who's just using proximity as convenience. And don't get it twisted. Scarcity doesn't mean becoming emotionally unavailable or cold. It means being selective. It means not texting back within seconds just because your phone lights up. It means not giving someone repeated access to your energy when they haven't done anything to earn it. It means knowing your worth so well that you no longer feel pressured to prove it. People chase what feels valuable. and people value what they can't easily control. So when a woman realizes that you're no longer emotionally reactive, that her flirty messages don't guarantee a reply, that her compliments don't automatically reopen the door, that her patterns of manipulation are no longer working, she starts to recalibrate. She's forced to reassess not just how she sees you, but how she treats you, because you've stopped being available on demand, and that disruption in the pattern is what forces people to reflect. You can't keep offering unlimited availability to someone who's only giving you occasional interest. You can't keep pouring into someone who's only dipping into your energy when it suits them. Scarcity is what reminds people that they're not entitled to you. Not your love, not your time, not your attention. And it teaches you to stop giving access to people who haven't earned proximity to your emotional core. You are not a free refill of validation. You are not a tool for someone's convenience. And when you move like a man who understands that, the entire energy of your relationships begins to change. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying your standards. Because the moment you embrace scarcity with grace and certainty, you create a space that can only be filled by someone who's truly willing to meet you at the level you've already risen to. So let's bring this home. You now know the signs, the subtle patterns, the emotional cues, and the manipulative phrases wrapped in softness that are meant to disarm you. You've seen how easy it is to fall into the trap when you're coming from a place of hope, of desire, or even unhealed need. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. The real power lies in what you do next. Whether you continue playing a role in someone else's game, or step back and rewrite the rules entirely. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who's already decided to exploit it. You don't need to stay available to someone who only values you when it benefits them. What you do need is to reclaim your presence. Guard your energy. Show up for yourself so fully that anyone who wants access to you has to come with real intention, not convenience. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Clear on what you bring to the table. Clear on what you'll no longer tolerate. Clear on the fact that your time, your care, your consistency, those are gifts, and only the ones who recognize them as such should receive them. So the next time she says those 3 words, when she tries to pull you in with a smile, with a need, with a favor, pause, not with fear, but with power, because now you see the pattern, and now you have the choice. Choose you, every time, with class, with clarity, and without apology.